Welcome to How Positive Are You, a podcast that rethinks everything you might have heard about HIV and AIDS. I'm David Crow, president of Rethinking AIDS and the Alberta Reappraising AIDS Society, calling in from Calgary in Western Canada. With me today is co-host Elizabeth Ely in New York City.
Hi, David.
Hi, Beth. Today we interview London-based documentary filmmaker Joan Shenton. But first, let me go through a little bit of feedback from our listeners. One of the feedbacks from our listeners is just actually listening to our podcasts. And you might not know it, but we keep track of how many people do this. And we now have 2 podcasts that have over 1,000 listeners. That's the Nancy Turner Banks podcast number 26 and the Maria Gonzalez from Monarcas, Peru podcast number 31. And I expect that very soon there'll be other podcasts that exceed the 1,000 listener threshold.
That's great. I'm happy to hear we're getting some big audiences.
Yeah, it is really great. So even if people don't leave us feedback, just the fact that they've listened is a little check mark and it makes us feel good. So tell your friends about us and let's see if we can get the first podcast over 2,000 listeners.
Great.
Jeff from Arizona emailed us twice. The first time he said, episode 66, which was Teen Vandamas, your most recent, was excellent. It was good to hear and listen to the show. How positive are you? I look forward to the show and waiting patiently for your next one. You're doing great work. He also said episode 67, which was Joe Stokely, was an awesome show, and Joe was very moving. Thank you again. He then wrote about episode 68, which was Lise from South Africa. He said it was really enjoyable and a very easygoing discussion. The conversation was relaxing and simple to listen to, but yet it was very informative. You guys sounded very relaxed and gave some good insights while interacting with your guest. Another excellent show, and then there's like 8 exclamation marks. And I also wish to thank Beth as well. And there's another 8 exclamation marks.
8 exclamation marks right back at you.
Yes. And now, how about some background on our guest, Beth?
Sure. Joan Shenton is the head of Meditel Productions and an award-winning British news producer, director, and presenter. Up until today, I hadn't known that she is fluent in Spanish as well as English because she was born in Chile. After graduating from St. Anne's College, Oxford, in 1964, she naturally put her bilingual skills to work as a reporter for the BBC Latin American service. Joan went on to report for and co-host several TV and radio programs in England. Meditel Productions has, since its founding in 1981, specialized in health and medical issues, producing more than 150 programs for network TV. From the late 80s through 1993, Channel 4 Television and Sky News commissioned several AIDS programs from Meditel, and one of these, AZT Cause for Concern, won a Certificate of Educational Merit from the British Medical Association. Meditel was also the first independent company to win a Royal Television Society Journalism Award for AIDS, The Unheard Voices, in 1988. Her book, Positively False, Exposing the Myths Around HIV and AIDS, came out in 1998. Joan's nonprofit organization, the Immunity Resource Foundation, holds an impressive historical archive of videos and documents on the AIDS debate. Her recent documentary, Positively False, Birth of a Heresy, used some of those video archives going back 25 years. She's about to release yet another film, Positive Hell, in which she interviews HIV positives in Spain who are still around 27 years after that diagnosis. Let's just say she gives them positive hell as a hard-hitting journalist. But I know Joan to be a truly warm, witty, and helpful person, someone I count as a friend. We're delighted to have her with us today to talk about this new film and the Immunity Resource Foundation's newly launched website as a new and very valuable resource. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you, Beth. Hello to you and to David. That was a very kind and generous introduction.
Hi, Joan. It's good to have you back. I'll put a link to the previous podcast we did with you in 2011, but there's a lot of new stuff to talk about this time, so I'm excited about this conversation. So you went to Spain to interview a group of former IV drug users who are HIV positive and all working with a single doctor outside of the paradigm of HIV being a deadly virus. So can you tell us a little bit about this group? They sound really fascinating.
It is really, David. What happened was I've always had close relationship with the Spanish AIDS dissidents through Alfredo Embid, who is a veteran dissident. And I got to know about a group in the north of Spain who have their own network called Superando el SIDA, which means overcoming AIDS. And I'm not absolutely sure how I know. The doctor, Manuel Garrido, who runs it and who runs the website, actually got in touch with me because he was so concerned about baby Rico and everything that had happened to this child that when he was given AZT and was so ill, that he wondered if there was anything we could do together in the form of a petition that would go to all health ministers and heads of state to say, please, could you stop this terrible thing that's happening? In all of that connection that we had, he told me that he'd been positive for 27 years. And as I said, he's a doctor, a medical doctor, and that he knew at least 20 or 30 people in his area of northern Spain, Galicia, who had also lived with that diagnosis for many, many years. So I said, well, would it be possible to come and interview you? And I said, and how come we don't know about this? Well, the thing is that they don't speak English, and this is a problem. So they haven't been linking up with Rethinking AIDS enough,
Right.
Or with us, the Immunity Resource Foundation.
And the fact that you speak Spanish is a real bonus here, giving you a link into these people. So are they all, I understood some of them were former IV drug users. Are they all former IV drug users, including the doctor?
The doctor was a very alcoholic, and he took drugs as well. But the others were IV drug users. And the story is that at the end of Franco's rule in Spain, the dictator, during his rule, situation of drugs was very, very carefully controlled. But then in the north of Spain, drugs started pouring into the ports of Vigo and other places, and no one really, and the drugs were really cheap. And these young people, they were in their teens, the ones I interviewed, they were 16 and 17, were serious heroin addicts at that age.
Oh.
And the drugs were available to them, and they didn't realize just how damaging they would be. They became addicts. And then there was a very successful program to get people off drugs called Proyecto Hombre, Project Man, run in fact by the Catholic Church and I think funded by the Spanish government as well. And apparently there were some really brilliant psychotherapists involved, and they managed to get the young people I talked to, who are now 27 years older, off the drugs. But at the same time, of course, they were tested, and they tested positive for HIV.
Out of the frying pan into the fire.
You know, I don't know if it's a given that all intravenous drug users are going to test positive for HIV. To what do you ascribe that singular diagnosis?
Well, I always remember Peter Duisberg saying that it's what goes through the needle, not the needle, that's the problem. And if you're injecting 3 times a day straight into the vein with filthy sort of products that have been cut umpteen times over, but, from wherever they came from. I mean, I know they put petroleum in it and talcum powder and kerosene. I don't know. I really don't know exactly what they do.
At RA 2009, some of the Italians, I don't know if it was Dr. Ruggiero or Daniele Mandrioli, showed some microscope pictures of street drugs, and there were some shards of metal or glass in one picture,
really?
And there were parts of insect bodies in another picture. I think just about anything is found in street drugs, so I think it's an important point for people to realize that very little of what goes into street drugs is actually the active ingredient. It's just like pesticides or something else. Much more of it is what it's mixed with. And of course, in the case of street drugs, there's no control. There's no quality control over what in so-called inert ingredients street drugs are mixed with. So they can be as toxic or more toxic than the actual drugs.
Okay, I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Beth, I can just come in to your first question there also. That the point is that having injected themselves with this filthy stuff, they were all very ill because they had and they were diagnosed with hepatitis C, hepatitis non-A, non-B, syphilis. They were all getting infections, so they were very ill from their state of health.
Okay, so that sort of answers what I was going to ask, which was, I understand that shooting heroin and having all this junk in it as well could cause a person to become ill. What I didn't understand was how it could cause an HIV positive diagnosis. I understand that those are two separate things, but now that you mention these specific illnesses, such as syphilis, such as liver problems, I can see that those are some of the things that touch off also.
Indeed, because it would raise their antibody profile.
Right. And also it should be noted that when the testers know that you are an IV drug user, automatically you're in one of the risk groups, and so that they interpret the test more liberally than they would if you said you were just naive of such things.
That's the point, yes.
That is an important point, Beth. And if in the few cases where these flow charts have been published, which is how the doctors follow through on testing, like what do I do if the second test is negative and the first one was positive, that kind of question, it will say if somebody is at risk, is in a risk group, even if the first test is negative, you can still go on and do further testing. So it increases the probability that somebody who's an IV drug user, gay man, or whatever will be tested positive.
So they sort of, the people I interviewed were extremely angry about the way they've been treated over the years. And the interesting thing was that, for example, the doctor, he's never taken any antivirals at all. He was an alcoholic, but he joined AA and he came off alcohol and drugs. And he's never been ill. I mean, he says apart from a minor prostate problem, he's never been ill. They're all heterosexual, the ones I interviewed. They're married. Some of them, for example, Raquel, she's had 2 children. She had a baby when she was an addict. And the baby was born with her antibodies, HIV antibodies, but lost them after 18 months. And at that stage in the early 80s, they weren't offering AZT, and they didn't have this AZT intravenous treatment.
Lord be praised.
So they didn't. However, to be fair, what happened next was when she next got pregnant, she never took any antivirals for 10 years. And then she got pregnant again, and she had a baby who was born with her antibodies, HIV antibodies, and this time they persuaded her to take AZT and give the baby AZT. But that was only very briefly. The baby lost her mother's antibodies after 18 months, and both girls are very healthy, career women, and one of them doesn't even know this was a problem at all to anybody. They're absolutely fine. The only thing is the second one that was given AZT, Raquel says she has atypical skin conditions, which she wonders whether it had anything to do with the AZT.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to just backtrack a little bit to this issue of the doctor not having gotten ill. I wonder when these people got a clue that the whole AIDS thing was bunk and that they didn't want to participate in the drugs, or how did that come about that they got this awareness? Because usually they would be told something and they would say, "Oh, I'm ill and I need to take these drugs." Did they for instance go to this doctor straight up because he was the only one in their hometown who specialized in this, or what was his story? Did he seek out these people, or I just don't know where everybody got the original awareness that what they had heard was not true.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not. My maths is so bad. If I go back 27 years, what year are we in? Because that's the year he was diagnosed. The doctor.
That would be 1986 thereabouts.
Yeah. Well, he very, very early on read Peter Duesberg's piece in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And he was aware very, very early on.
This was
he was
before
reading
his
medical literature.
Oh, this would have been around the same time.
Well, no, this Peter's book came out in 96.
No, this was Peter's first paper in cancer research.
Oh, okay. His 1980s, that was 1987.
Yes, and he followed, he became very, very well read. I mean, he's read everything. He knows just about every reference since 87 on AIDS dissidents and the medical literature. So he published literature. So he became aware very early on, but others didn't. And so Raquel, for example, she took antivirals for 8 years during these 26 years since she was diagnosed. And she then heard about the dissident debate through the website that was run by Dr. Garrido, whose name is Manolo. And she then she just couldn't believe it. She said, I'm just trying to find something, she says, about this. I will in a second. Yeah. When I started learning about all of this and reading the internet, the extent of the lie involved in this, well, at first I felt angry, because how can it be that we've been treated like, well, the most important thing seems to have been the money. But afterwards, the truth is that I felt relieved. All my life, they've been telling me from the age of 19 that I had a virus, that I'm going to die, and it turned out that I don't have a virus. Well, I began to laugh, and I started laughing a lot, and I thought at that moment how strange life is. Such a long time believing I was going to die, and suddenly I don't have a virus.
That's amazing. That's so powerful, and that I think that encapsulates the thoughts of a lot of people who absorbed the propaganda, got diagnosed, and then went years, sometimes without realizing the truth, and then one day something slapped them in the face, and they woke up and said, "I can't believe this. This is just a total fraud, and it's been killing me psychologically and physically."
Yeah, I should note, when you mentioned the internet, I was thinking, oh, there was no internet in 86, 87. No, you're talking 8 years later in, say, around 1995. Yeah, or more than that. And it occurs to me that the internet is the worst thing that could happen to these people purveying the AIDS myth. Mm-hmm. It is the worst thing that ever happened to them, because people are stumbling on this information, and it's coming out in different languages. So, they get very angry and even talk seriously about shutting down the internet.
That's right, and they express their disgust. I mean, Suso, for example, he was admitted into hospital because he had a car crash, and he says, "They left me lame with a fractured femur because I was HIV positive. They didn't operate on me and left me with my bone unset. The excuse that they were waiting for some surgical gloves to arrive from Miami in order to be able to operate on me." Time went by and the gloves didn't arrive and they didn't operate on me and my femur became calloused and they left me like that.
Oh, my God.
Well, if he had died of any of the infections ensuing or anything, he would, of course, have been related as an AIDS death.
Well, even if he had been operated on, it makes me wonder how much the fear of the doctors would interfere with medical treatment so that the outcome of somebody who's HIV positive during surgery or some other treatment would be worse because the doctor's taking all these extra precautions, worrying about themselves a lot more than focusing on the operation. So the chances that a doctor will make a mistake, a surgical mistake, or give the wrong drug, or forget to do something may be much higher with HIV positive people, which helps promote the belief that they're sicker and more likely to die of things.
What surprised you the most about these people's stories once you got going on them?
Oh, on this situation, I was amazed at A, their knowledge, and B, their absolute conviction that they were right and that all the dissident scientists are right. And it's really interesting because they are affected people, right, as they say, and they are the ones that are saying it is absolutely wrong and it is a fraud. I mean, Dr. Garrido, Manolo, says, never before have things been done like this to create a panic from the very first moment. And furthermore, this was done by the health authorities themselves. I've said it all now. This is extremely serious, a total blunder, and it should give pause for thought. Everything that has been said about AIDS being a serious problem, about AIDS being an infectious problem, about the diagnoses, it is all a complete fraud, and it causes tremendous damage to the people involved.
That doesn't leave much room for interpretation, does it?
And all of this is going to be in your film that you're working on, like all of these quotes. From a practical point of view, I presume that you're going to do this film with English subtitles. Have you thought about doing it with other languages as well?
Well, we actually thought, Andi Reiss, who is co-producing this with me, and he produced Positively False Birth of a Heresy as well, he's keen to actually use voices to voice it, to give instead of subtitles, because you get a much higher interest and it's more immediate.
So, in other words, they'll have somebody do voiceover dubbing in English for each of these. So you'll get some male and female actors who will produce the voices for all these different people.
Yes, that is the current plan.
But it still will definitely be available in English.
Oh, yeah, it has to be. Yes.
Yeah, because these people need to get their story out to the world. And obviously, they've probably had influence in Spain through Superando Alcida. Yeah. But this story needs to get out to the world. Are they doing anything in particular for their health? I mean, these people were seriously ill, drug users. I mean, whether you consider drug use itself to be an illness, it creates a lot of health problems. So have they taken particular courses to resolve the legacy of drug use?
I think they just look after themselves with vitamins and health. I think Dr. Garrido has certain ways of advising them on their health, but I don't know what exactly he says. But Manuel, this is another interviewee who used to be a dealer, he says, now I lead a really healthy life. I look after myself like a healthy person. I eat healthily. I sleep proper hours. I walk every day, 12 kilometers. I go on bicycle rides. I'm involved with ecological organizations. So now he lives with his son, and he said, I have good relations with my friends and family, so I'm happy with my life today.
Oh, we should all be so lucky. I mean, that's great.
It is.
Do all those things, yeah.
There's a lot of so-called normal HIV-negative people who could learn from what he just said. I mean, what he's basically talking about is it's not just what you eat. It's not just getting adequate exercise, but it's also having the positive psychological influences in your life, like family, like working for a good cause, working with other people. Those are the things that make us healthy. And there's a lot of so-called HIV negative healthy people who are obsessed with the pills that they're taking every day for blood pressure, for cholesterol, for this and that and the other thing, and they're actually obsessed with their health in a really negative way as opposed to a positive way.
Yeah, even if what they're doing is very alternative, they can become very obsessed over those
with
alternatives in kind of an unhealthy way, where they feel that the test must mean something. It must mean something about their so-called immune system, and they just kind of miss the forest for the trees, in my opinion.
Manolo's advice actually was, if you have any health problems, treat those problems appropriately in the way they've always been treated, and avoid being treated as an ill person, and don't allow yourself to be taken into the AIDS zone. But it's difficult to do that because you end up having arguments with your doctors, as they all said to me.
So these people are very lucky to have a doctor who supports them. It's that person in medical authority who will affect your mindset in a lot of directions.
Yeah, because the conundrum for a lot of HIV positive people is like everything's wonderful, and then they get sick, and then they go to this doctor, and they've got this struggle with the doctor to get A, treated for what is their problem, and B, not to get treated for what they don't see as a problem, but what the doctor sees as the overarching problem that must be dealt with before everything else. Reminds me of the story of Carrie Stokely and many others who had to struggle to get treated for their real serious, in her case, life-threatening health problem, and treatment was delayed, and who knows if Carrie wouldn't be with us today if she hadn't been able to get a sympathetic doctor to treat what was wrong with her. Has this group done other things apart from their website, Superando El SIDA, in the organization? Like, do they have meetings? Have they had conferences? Is there anything else that's come out of this group?
No, they do get together, but it's a small group in the north of Spain, and the distances are quite big between them. They live in different towns. So it's the website, really, that keeps them together, and they're very pleased that they're being interviewed. And that we're going to get this film out somehow. I hope we can get distribution this time.
Yeah, have they been helpful to other people? I mean, obviously, I guess they've formed a group that sort of advocates, and have they been able to help people going forward and bring out this information
they have,
to others?
Because they have. I think Manolo said he had about 1,000 people that have linked up with them, and many are in South America, in Latin America.
Right, because of the language thing. It's that's great. And have the local public health authorities responded in kind? Have they been under fire in any way, or have they found it fairly easy to do business?
I haven't really gone into that in any detail, and I shall look into whether or not they have any campaigns going locally.
Well, just whether the mainstream has been on the attack at all.
Not really. No, a lot of them say that during all these years, 27 years is a long time, that they've met some doctors who have said, especially Raquel, who said, listen, you can have unprotected sex with your husband. Don't be so silly. You'll be fine. And who sort of winked and said, this whole thing is crazy. And she did have unprotected sex, and of course they have a daughter, and her husband has never ever tested positive, and he's had regular tests.
I see. Well, now why do they bother to get the tests if they know that this is all bunk?
He hasn't had a test for about 4 years, and he says he's never going to have another one. But he was tested 4 years ago, and I'm not sure whether it was, I don't know why, but she does get tested. She's under a follow-up program still.
A follow-up program for HIV?
Yeah, with the local hospital. Mm.
Really?
And I wonder what they think about it. But you're probably right. I mean, in any bureaucracy, there are a lot of people who know the corruption within their bureaucracy, but the vast majority of them are not willing to put their jobs, their positions, even their life on the line in order to confront the misdirection of the bureaucracy. Any bureaucracy is the same thing. There's a few brave people. There's the Peter Duesbergs, there's the Manuel Garridos, and then there's, for each one of those, there's 10 or 100 people who think the same things but won't dare say it publicly.
You know, it's very rare that people in such situations will not actually buy the product that they're selling. They do believe that they're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. I should mention that Dr. Manolo Garrido is not working as a doctor in the Orthodox field. He's outside it. He doesn't work at a local hospital or clinic.
But does he work as a sort of a traditional allopathic doctor, or as a homeopath or a naturopath, or like what modality does he practice?
He works as that, but not officially. He just helps all the people on the website and gives them advice, and they come and see him. Okay. He's not officially. Well, I need to find that out a little more clearly, but he's not working as a doctor in a Spanish hospital or clinic.
Right.
Oh, okay. He may actually be practicing traditional medicine.
Well, he probably is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to go back to Pablo, Raquel's husband, he said it's a long time. She says of him, he was being followed up. It's a long time now since he did this. He doesn't go for HIV tests anymore, but he did get tested for at least 15 years, a checkup every 3 years or 2 years, and the tests were always negative.
That's amazing. But to us, it's not surprising, but I think this is powerful testimony about the lack of sexual transmission of the virus, which we, of course, have lots of evidence about, but which is denied by the mainstream.
Right. Well, we should mention for some of our new listeners that it's food for thought that you cannot spread antibodies through sex, and the tests are antibody-based. Maybe you can spread viruses, but to spread antibodies is science fiction. The only way that antibodies can be spread is mother to child.
Well, actually, I think that's questionable, too. I think just because some babies have antibodies doesn't prove they got them from their mothers. I mean, in many of these cases, one of the largest groups of HIV babies is the babies of IV drug users, and those are exposed to the byproducts or the active ingredients of drug use in the womb.
Yes, true. I wasn't excluding that. I was just saying that the only way that you can spread antibodies, actually transmit them.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Through birth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are other ways that you might acquire antibodies, but you create them yourself. But to actually transmit from one person to another, sex won't do that.
Yes. Beth, do you have any more questions about the film, or shall we move on to the Immunity Resource Foundation?
Just when will we be able to view or buy this documentary film, and where?
That's a good question. We're about halfway through. I don't reckon we're going to finish this before until the end of the year.
Will the proceeds from the sales go to the Immunity Resource Foundation or anywhere else?
Well, I just wanted to say we're very grateful for the fact that we were funded to go to Spain by Dr. Christian Fiala, and then Bob Lepo very generously matched Dr. Fiala's donation so that we could do proper post-production and pay for these voices. So we're really grateful for that. At the moment, we don't know what's going to happen because we're going to try and get a distributor, and we're going to send it round the festivals.
Good.
So that's the plan, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and of course the festival circuit unfortunately takes a year at the front of a film, where you can't distribute it in any other way until the film festival circuit. But it's very important if there's a chance to get wider distribution, and the film festival circuit is where is kind of like the meat market for films. If you got to strut in front of people who maybe there's somebody out there who's brave enough to pick up a film like this and to try to distribute it.
Yeah. Maybe because we're making it very much all just personal anecdote from the people themselves, and they speak out really strongly, so we'll see.
And the AIDS establishment is getting weaker every year, although it still gets lots of money. Its grip on the human psyche is getting less and less every year. It's just becoming something that you give money to once a year, and nobody really takes seriously beyond that. It's just the annual duty call to write a check, or not even to go on a walk anymore. It's like fewer and fewer people are actually getting off the couch to help AIDS Inc. But of course, it's now really surviving on government money, and if the U.S. government continues to add $1 billion every year to its funding, not to give another $1 billion, but to add $1 billion to the total that's given to the AIDS establishment, I mean, it retains a lot of strength just from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your website, Joan, is immunity.org.uk. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It is.
And what's the focus of the website? Like, what's your core mission? What are you bringing to the world that other websites are not doing as much of?
Well, basically, the possibility of viewing those documentaries that are on it, and there are about 50, I think, maybe less. And then we redesigned it. Mark Wood has redesigned the website and included a blog now, because we started our website ages ago and it didn't have a blog. So it's now WordPress. And Mo Aziz, who is the author of a book called Prescribing Sunshine, which looks at the effect of vitamin D on immune deficiency, and he included a chapter on AIDS and an interview with me in it. He's the editor of the blog, and I'm an administrator, and all we've done is, what Mark's done is shift most of the material across to this new site, which now has a blog and news page. So we want people to contribute as much as possible, and we are, as you know, always linking up with you, David and Beth, on the Rethinking AIDS website.
Yes.
So really, that's essentially what it is, and we will keep adding material to our website from the archive, so that there's a body of work there.
Good.
It seems that we've moved to the sort of non-sexy part of our interview, but I'd like to stress to our listeners that for me this is highly, highly important, that you have these archives. Maybe you always had them there, but now it's so user-friendly. It's not just that I'm pitching this, it's just I'm blown away by how useful and how just full of resources this site is, and how for newcomers to these questions, this would be a really great place to start, is the immunity.org UK website. I was really pleased when I looked at it. What I found was historic issues of Continuum magazine from the early 90s into 2001. I found all your reports for British TV, video interviews with and articles by major AIDS rethinkers, and news and rebuttals of mainstream news reports. In other words, you not only put your own news and comments by some of the major dissident voices, but also when a news report comes out, just as a few days ago something came out on Slate about Tommy Morrison supposedly dying of AIDS, you responded to that point by point, and that's very, very important to do. I think that this is just an explosive resource.
There's a lot to do, Beth. We still got to finish putting all the articles across and put new stuff on, but thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to people contributing.
Yes, I did notice that some of the authors' pages were not full, but they were not.
They're not finished. You're quite right. We're only halfway through that. Which actually brings me to say, Beth, can I just say that anyone who thinks they have an article that would be suitable for us to put up, please send it. If they could send it to irf@immunity.org.uk.
We'll put that on our website. Also, the archive of articles looks very similar to that of the Virus Myth site. If people are not familiar with virusmyth.com, or is it virusmyth.net, that is the original archive dating back to the 90s of dissident articles, and it does have a find page that is listed very similarly to yours with the names of the authors and the names of the topics. And I think it's still a very useful archive. Did you add some articles to that, or is there some overlap, or is there things that you've left out that are on the Virus Myth
Some overlap,
site?
yes. No, the Virus Myth website is excellent, and some of the articles overlap. But we've got to add many more to ours, so we're working on that. Yeah. And David and Beth, Beth, for example, we need you to send us further articles of yours.
What I should do, Joan, is give you access to my online database where you could do queries for you could do queries for Henry Bauer, for example, and it would pull up all the articles that I have in my database, and then you could put some of the better ones, some of the ones that are more relevant to HIV and AIDS, not necessarily better. You could add those to your archive as well.
If she accesses your archive, if she accesses the David Crow Library at aras.ab.ca, she will be working on this for the next 10 years, I suppose, because it's just so, the depth and breadth of that database is so amazing.
Yeah.
I have to say that my friend David here is an absolute nut job about collecting these things, and I mean that in the best possible way.
I have a separate private entry point for that database for copyright reasons. I don't make all the copies of the articles that I have available on the ARS website, but I have over 5,000 articles, scientific papers, et cetera, related specifically to the subject of AIDS in a database, and in most cases the full text of the paper or the newspaper article or whatever is available.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Excellent.
That's just amazing. And
David,
of course,
if
you will want to
email me.
Yes, I will send
course.
you. I will send you access for the database.
Thank you.
You know, Joan, I'd like to put in a plug here for adding a link to How Positive Are You?
Absolutely.
Yes, Joan.
Do we rate?
Joan,
do we rate or not?
Actually, no. It is there. There is a link to How Positive Are You. I was just about to die of a heart attack thinking that Joan was not going to put in a link to our podcast, but under links, How Positive Are You is there, and it's a correct link.
Excellent. And we have.
I thought
it
was, but I was horrified for a moment.
Yes.
We have Facebook pages and discussions all over the world. It's just so amazing, the explosion of information just in the last couple of years.
Yes, and I would just like to say, if I could plug my own database, if there are people who are doing their own research into HIV and AIDS and are having difficulty getting copies of scientific papers, newspaper articles, things like that, I'm happy to give them access, username and password, to my database, which gives them access to the full text, which is not always available through the ARS or Rethinking AIDS website.
Fantastic,
They
David.
they just need to contact
Really.
me and explain what they're doing, and I will give it so that I can deal with the copyright
Great.
problem, and not because I can't make scientific articles fully public on the ARAS website.
Right. And also Joan states on the website that she hopes to raise funds through fees that she collects for searches of this information that she provides to, say, scientists, journalists, even investors, and the like. And what I see on the website looks free to us, but there might be some deeper level of research that she's offering for that fee. Is that correct, Joan?
Listen, you hit a raw vein here. I was so far we've offered all our videos free, and I'm going to have a discussion with the one or two people now as to whether or not we could charge a little bit for viewing them, because we badly need funding.
Or perhaps maybe the suggested donation model or something, like really strongly suggesting. There are many ways to do that.
I'll tell you what, we've had a few very kind people donating to us, but very sporadically. But one of the things that I've noticed there's a big need for, and David, I think probably in the end I shove them in your direction, if you see what I mean. I don't shove them, I guide them, is people wanting to come off their drugs and to compare their experiences.
Yes, and I think that's where the website Living Without AIDS Drugs is very important, and I'm trying to accumulate stories there of people who have never started the drugs or who have stopped the drugs, and what happened when they stopped the drugs. Or in one case recently, a man who'd been not taking drugs for 30 years, and then all of a sudden got sick and decided to take drugs. I thought it was a compelling story because he had never actually left the AIDS zone. He just thought he was really special because he didn't have to take the drugs. But after 30 years, when he got sick, like everybody, I mean, living 30 years without illness is actually breaking a world record, I think. But the first time he actually got a serious illness, he immediately went on the drugs because he'd been waiting for that moment for 30 years. But I think those stories are very compelling, and a lot of people will say to me, it's all very well to have this scientific information and blah, 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 it's great at an academic level, but I want to know that somebody else went through the same thing as me and didn't take the drugs, or they stopped the drugs and their life didn't fall apart. It's very important to have these stories, and I think this is one area where we need more video footage of this. Like, it's nice to have a written story, but we also need video footage, and I think your new documentary will help provide this. When I look at the website of videos, like, there's a lot of people, journalists, scientists, people talking about it, but there's less of the actual HIV positive people.
You're right. And Dr. Garrido said this battle will only be won with the help of those who are affected.
Right. Well, that it's important also to bring out the positive aspects of this rather than resisting something. I can't stress that enough, that the difference between people who make it through this and who don't make it through this, the one X factor, the one little chromosome in there, not X chromosome, but strange chromosome that they carry, is one of working toward things rather than against things. As Christine Majori said to me once, she said, always stand for something positive. So what are they going to do? Stand outside your door with signs saying, down with health freedom, down with choice, down with knowledge? They're not going to do that. And I think it's great that David was far too modest in talking about his efforts to bring out these stories, because actually we bring out a lot of these stories every few episodes on how positive are you.
That's true.
And what I like about that is not just, the boring data about, how long did it take you to get off the drugs? When did you first realize that these people actually have animated discussions with us about their outlook on life, about what motivates them to keep going with this, and from
You're
what
right
angle
there,
they
yeah.
approached it. It's become, we've had some really moving discussions with people that I can never predict how it's going to turn out.
I don't know if I've
Yes.
promoted another Spanish film that has nothing to do with HIV and AIDS, but it bears on what Beth said. It's a film called No. It's Spanish, and when I saw it, it had English subtitles, and it's about the referendum that was the
Yeah.
end of Augusto Pinochet. And basically, the story was that Augusto Pinochet was under a little bit of pressure to look more democratic. So he said, well, what we'll do is we'll have a referendum, and if I win the referendum, I get 8 more years as president of Chile. And it had to be done with a sort of modicum of democracy, but everything was stacked against the no side. It was either yes for Pinochet or no. And so the film is about this public relations person who gets roped in to work with the no side, and they, of course, they want to show pictures of Pinochet shooting people in in the streets. They want to see dead, tortured bodies. They want to show people how bad Pinochet was, and he said, no, 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 no. We need to show a positive vision of the future. And eventually he won that battle, and the no side became very positive. This is what Chile is going to be like when we regain our freedom. And they
Oh.
won, which was a big shock to the establishment. And everybody thought that Pinochet was basically going to have another coup. But the general said, your time is up. You're going to have to go. And so Pinochet did go. And most people have forgotten that he did not go in a violent coup. He went after a very positive advertising campaign that said, we will have a better life without Pinochet. And it was almost like the without Pinochet was forgotten. We're going to have a better life. Just vote no.
Right.
Gosh.
That's a very moving
Thanks, David.
message for us.
Yeah.
There's
So
also another documentary about the revolution in Estonia called The Singing Revolution. That, they just sang songs. They just filled arenas with people who sang a particular song that to them meant freedom. Instead of saying, we're against this tyranny, they said, we're for this. This is what we want. So I think that's a very positive message.
yeah, and I think in your documentary, I think what's most exciting to people is where you realize that people have not struggled with HIV. They've stopped struggling with HIV. They've gone beyond it, and they've said,
Yeah.
what's going to drive me is my family, my friends, my work,
Yeah.
my volunteering, my enjoying fresh air and good food, and all of those things. That's what my life is about.
Was there a particular story that sort of struck that chord most of all? Was there a particular character in your film who was most moving to you, Joan?
Do you know that really I did an in-depth interview with 5 people, and they were all moving. They were very different. One used to be a drug dealer, the other trained as a doctor, the other is a housewife, effectively, a mother of 2, and the other is her partner, who, as you know, didn't test positive. And the other is an intellectual. So they were all so different.
Uh-huh.
But would you say that they all provide a message that goes above and beyond HIV, a positive message as opposed to negative?
Completely. They just are wonderful people. And one of the quotes I remember is Pablo, Raquel's husband. He says, "I live with Raquel. I don't live with AIDS. I couldn't have had the same relationship, nor could I have the same relationship now if AIDS were present."
Right. Very, very moving.
Superando el SIDA. Going beyond AIDS and leaving it behind totally, not rejecting it, but ignoring it. And maybe maybe it will die when we don't feed it anymore. when we're too busy feeding kittens and
Yeah.
building new parks and helping the elderly and worrying about the important things in life and not worrying about a mythical virus.
Right. Well, what would happen if somebody waged a war and nobody showed up? Is the question that I send people. What would happen?
Beth, we've come
Yeah.
about to an hour. So, do you have any
Yeah.
final questions for Joan? Should we wrap this up?
I do. I have one. I have just one. And Joan, sweetie, friend, wonderful person, you've been around this movement. You've been around this movement for a long time, certainly much longer than I have. I only date back to 1992. And I wonder what you have noticed about how things have changed over the years, how progress has been made and what opportunities have been lost and why, and how we might focus our efforts going forward as one of the elder stateswomen of this movement. I mean, what have we done wrong, and what can we do right?
And that's just an enormous one. But I do note now that people are listening to you, and they're not hostile as they used to be. They are incredulous at times, but they're hostile. They're not hostile, and they go away thinking. So it's easier these days to talk about this than it was before. I think that Manuel Garrido is right. I think what we must do is now bring together the people who've been diagnosed and ask them to speak for the fraud and fraudulent science. In other words, we are campaigners, but we need the affected people to come together and fight.
But also to speak about a positive vision of their life beyond HIV and AIDS, not just to speak against HIV and AIDS.
Yeah, well, lest I sound too Pollyanna, what we just talked about, I want to stress what I've noticed is that as we've moved into this really positive phase, as it looks like we are actually winning, at least among people who really are open to this message, a lot of people won't be. But as that is happening, it's bringing out the real viciousness in the other side. We've seen the absolute violence with which the Nagel family has been attacked, for instance, and the absolute violence against us in the media. I mean, that is the death knell for their side when they have to fight back so hard. And I would caution people against thinking that it's safe now and you can go out and you won't be shot at. You really need to lawyer up, you need to educate yourself, you need to take care of business with healthcare proxies and living wills and things like that. It has never been more important to be more careful when you are HIV positive and pregnant.
Right. And Beth, can I just say thank you. I'm enormously grateful for the work you did with Lindsay Nagel and Baby Rico. And I mean, it was really valuable, your work there. And David, as you know, I'm your greatest fan.
Oh, Joan, this is getting way too much like a fan circle, because I'm one of your biggest fans too. I'm maybe not your biggest fan because you have so many. I can't state that.
So,
but you do.
I would just like to say that for our listeners, that the Immunity Resource Foundation's website is at, again, immunity.org UK, and we will post this and other relevant links because there have been many in this discussion.
.org.uk.
.uk, yes.
Immunity.org.uk.
Yeah.
Yes, .uk. We will post this and other relevant links on our How Positive Are You page for this episode, and there have been many, many resources here, and we hope that people will give them a visit. Is there anything else you need to say, Joan?
No, I'm just grateful to you for doing this and allowing me to speak, and thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Beth, and goodbye to everybody, including our listeners.
Bye.
We hope you are finding How Positive Are You episodes informative and enjoyable. Follow us as HPAY on Twitter. Email us with your comments at info@howpositiveareyou.com. Join our blog and download episodes or comment on episodes at howpositiveareyou.com. And join the Facebook group with the same name where you can also enter into discussions. If you'd like to support us financially, we'd love to list you as a sponsor or advertiser on our show, assuming you're not selling AZT. Thank you for listening, and join us for our next episode.